Excuse my squeaky voice. I was trying to sing along to an Oompa band last night with varying levels of success. It's a rare opportunity to get you three on stage together to have a discussion, fostering industry collaboration. Before we kick off, brief introductions. You know, three prominent industry associations. We all know who you are, but anyway. Matt, I'm going to start with you, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Green. I work at the WFA, World Federation of Advertisers. I've been there for about 9 odd years. And my role is to help our 200 odd members within the area of global media, principally. Is that enough of an intro?
It's a great intro. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Claire.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire O'Brien from ISBA, which is the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers. We represent the advertiser community and no one else. So we are the voice of British advertisers, and we also form are members of the WFA as well. And my role is head of media, looking after all things data and digital.
Wonderful, thank you. And finally, Richard.
Thank you, yes, and thank you for inviting us, Lindsay. I'm Richard Reeves. I run the Association of Online Publishers, the AOP. We're a trade association that champions the interests of the creators of original quality online content. Our membership is pretty diverse. It includes news organisations, broadcasters, magazine publishing companies, and pure play digital publishers.
Brilliant, thank you. And I want to start with the hard-hitting existential question. You kind of already touched on it, but why do you exist? What are you here for? Why does WFA exist?
I think we are here to solve problems for our members. We've been around since 1953. And yeah, we're here to accelerate our members forward. Our 140 corporate members and 60 National Advertiser Association members, such as ISBA. A lot of what we do is try and provide global frameworks which can help local markets adopt and adapt. So a lot of it's about taking best practices from local and moving up to global and then pushing back down to local again. That's a good way of working with our National Association members, and I think that helps them generally. And then with our corporate members, it's like most trade bodies, we're a peer-to-peer business, we're a network business. And we believe that we can sort of crowdsource solutions from that network, and there's always someone in our network who can help with someone's challenge, whatever that might be. So in short, I think we're here to solve problems, and we seem to be doing a reasonable job of that. So yeah, that's what we're here for.
Well, that's good. That's very good to know. Very helpful. And Claire, I'm assuming similar, especially given your members kind of roll up into WFA as well, like.
Yeah, many of our members are also members of the WFA, but our interest is very much focused on what happens in the UK as far as media and regulation and best practice goes. Excuse me. I'm sure we'll touch on projects that sort of connect, you know, where we're pushing things out at a local country level that the WFA have modelled for the world. But we're much older than the WFA. I think we were born round about turn of the century, and wherein a group of advertisers came together who'd been buying advertising in the newspapers. And the newspaper salespeople had been telling them what the circulation was and what the readership levels were of the papers. And they said, well, hang on, can we not get some independent verification of this? And they created the audit.
Objection. You'd say you can't trust a publisher?
I was going to say there'll be something, yeah.
So that was how ABC, the Audit Bureau of Circulation, was born. And then off the back of that, the advertisers said, well, I'm sure there's more we can do together for the greater good of the industry. And so they created the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers. And 100 and odd years later, I'm sure they wouldn't necessarily recognize what ISBA is today. But the basic sort of tenet of why we're here is still very much in that spirit in which it was created.
Brilliant, excellent potted history, thank you. And Richard, same question to you.
Yeah, but a slightly more honest answer is that actually, until I started working for a trade body, I had no idea why they exist either. But I have learnt a lot, and I actually feel quite empowered by what we're able to do in terms of representation and the collective voice of our community. And I think I've been on a journey the last 8 years I've been running AOP, and I actually have begun to recognise how important, not just for my community, the creators of online content, but advertisers, ad tech vendors, those communities around collective issues need a joined up voice represented in the right forums. We're an industry of self-regulation, and while we retain that self-regulation, it's very important that the communities are appropriately represented on those platforms.
Interesting. And in a world where, we're trying to foster greater direct relationships between brands and publishers as a way of kind of understanding data better, understanding measurement better, etc. Are you finding that actually the AOP and the advertiser associations are working more closely together? Is there more joined up thinking than there has been before? And what does that look like?
Okay, shall I go with this one? Sorry, Matt, to jump in, because it's a case in point. We ran at ISBA, our members asked 4 years ago now, how can we get greater transparency into the programmatic supply chain? So driven by this, we put together the project which everyone here will have heard of, which was the Programmatic Supply Chain Transparency Study. Such an elegant, off the tip of the tongue,
catchy, yeah.
Very catchy, and it makes the most hideous acronym as well. So don't even go there.
I'm now trying to work it out. You're going to have to tell
me. I know
me.
you have to.
We're a bit slow today.
It's too mentally taxing to do that. So we created that, and because we wanted to measure, assess the supply chain from the advertiser right the way through to the publisher, we immediately went to the AOP and said, look, this is what we have in mind. We think this would also be very good for publishers to have this view. And so that was how the study, which PwC carried out for us, was born, and with the AOP as a sort of a driving participant at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be even more generous in so much as I think trade bodies support each other as well. And I think in this instance that Claire talks about, very much the advertisers, in very much the same way as the publishers, were beginning to question aspects of the supply chain and the difficulty to understand some of those complexities and interrogate the data. So it was quite ironic that simultaneously, when they were having the conversation within the advertiser community, that within the publisher community we were having the same. And I think, obviously we had one particular organisation within the publishing community that had already exposed potentially a vulnerability to that supply chain, but recognised that for the industry to move and act against those observations, there needs to be a clear presentation of evidence. And AOP is quite a small organisation. We're challenged with funding, like all trade bodies. We are owned by our members, but it's been challenging for the publishing community over the last 20 years or so. So we weren't ever going to be in a position to do it on our own. And I think that also demonstrated, not only, do I remember a meeting with myself, a publisher, and Claire and Steve, obviously, over at ISBA, with the light bulb going on, saying, well, look, there is nothing but a shared interest here. How do we make it happen? And I'm massively indebted to the fact that ISBA and those advertisers had the means to help fund and support something that has then subsequently created the effective coming together of all constituents within our industry in the guise of the task force, which then moves on to create
that was the next step, because once we had the study and had identified what needed attention, if not fixing, was bringing the IAB into the fold then, as well as the IPA representing agencies, and creating a fully 360-degree grouping of the whole industries, all the issue, all the interests and stakeholder interests represented on a task force, which did come out with an initial solution earlier this year. But it's been a great bonding exercise, and we would expect there to be healthy tensions, right and proper. But
I would expect that, yes, absolutely.
yes, you would expect that. And
Maybe unhealthy tensions too, maybe.
I wouldn't, yes. I mean, only unhealthy in that they get healthy through discussion.
But there's no strangers. Everyone's familiar. Precedent's been set. We had, those same four representative organisations, created JIC webs that then created a brand safety standard that's now amalgamated as part of the tag standard. It's the same four constituents that drive the governance of UCOM, which is the universal measurement of the measurement standard for online media. So we knew each other well, and inevitably, if you end up working at a trade association, you've probably done so because you're putting something back in after a career within this industry too. So.
And I think the thing about that task force that was really important, yes, the trade bodies led it, but actually it was populated by practitioners. So we brought our members along. The same with the publishers. So the majority of people sitting around those tables with those discussions were not trade body people, but our members.
Matt, I want to understand from you, obviously you represent advertisers on a global scale, being the WFA, kind of what your members are coming to you about, and has that changed? We're in a strange time at the moment. There's a lot going on globally, from a macro level, from a micro level, in terms of advertising directly, but also kind of the wider economic crisis. What are your advertisers' biggest concerns, and what are they coming to you for support on?
Well, there's a couple of things which have come up in the past few years. One of them is brand safety, which has been a big focus for our members, for really obvious reasons, which I needn't really explain. But and so we've sought to try and help in that area by creating a global cross-industry working group called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, which has been trying to introduce more standards in the way that brand safety is measured and approached. And that's a working group which is composed of platforms, agencies, advertisers, and others. I think advertisers have become to realize, maybe it's been fairly obvious, but these platforms have obviously grown enormously on the back. They're ad funded, aren't they? And so they've grown through advertisers' budgets, and they've really changed the world, the platforms, have they not? So, we have the introduction of fake news and misinformation and disinformation, which has had massive ramifications for politics and society. So advertisers have become much more preoccupied with the role they inhabit in the world and how they influence big institutions like politics. Yeah. So I think that's a change. I don't think that's something we've seen so much of in the past. So an increasing awareness of that sort of thing, if nothing else. And then the other one, which we were speaking about earlier, is about cross-media measurement, which is an age-old concern. In fact, that was part of why we were set up in 53, was to try and address measurement. So you might question why we hadn't sort of...
How have you, you haven't got very far then.
Still working away.
Right, interesting.
But it's come back, hasn't it? Because,
it's very important.
It's very important, yeah. So we were encouraged by some of our members to try and introduce, a bit like GARM, to try and get everyone together collectively, maybe to set some principles which can help everyone move forward a bit more steadfastly on a local level, because increasingly these conversations are global in nature, whereas measurement is kind of a local thing. Actually, so many of the actors are global, and so it does seem that there can be quite a lot done on a global level. And so that's where we've been focusing quite a lot for our members in recent years.
And what does that look like?
Well, we started by setting some principles, and then this thing unfolded. Within a working group, again, that we set up, we created a technology schematic, a concept for how cross-media measurement could be done, a diagram, if you like, for how the pipes could be connected, which could solve for unduplicated reach across TV and digital, because that's what advertisers want. They want to be able to log into a system today to see what yesterday's unduplicated reach was across YouTube and ITV. at a high level. So that technology schematic
Right.
came
So,
into life. We conducted a peer review of that and invited the world's measurement experts to come and have a look, do a collective tire kicking exercise of it. Lots of questions remained, and it was that point, because ANA and ISBA and other associations have been right in the center of that these guys said, well, look, we think there's an opportunity for us to take those principles and that concept and try and actually build that out into a full solution for the UK and the US markets as well.
and so where do then the lines blur of you being a trade association, industry association, a trade body, and a technology supplier? And does that then, if you're getting involved in the tech side, does that then make you less impartial, make you not impartial anymore?
Well, I don't think we're a vendor, because what we've done is taken a concept which we've looked at, had people form their own view of, but we have decided to endorse it because we think at a high level it just really makes sense. Without going into all the details behind it, it's not so esoteric. It's a mechanism for using panels, which was still an important part of measurement, but essentially it's a means of training a model which can be applied to all campaign impressions, and we think this is probably the direction of travel for measurement. And so I guess we are partial towards this, but we're not a tech vendor. What we're doing is we're setting frameworks, which is what we've always done. We're setting frameworks, and in this instance, we've actually got open source code for this concept, but it's a framework, it's a reference implementation. And I don't think that makes us a vendor, in fact, or necessarily partial. I think what we're doing is helping local stakeholder groups to set that up. So we are partial towards that approach, but we're not a vendor.
Yeah. If you don't, who will?
And that's obviously a major project for ISBA at the moment, and I think Steve sort of sleeps and breathes it through. I'm not involved directly in that project, but to your point, Lindsay, about ownership, that there is, ISBA in the UK is probably more advanced of all the local associations in bringing together an actual funded working model of this, which will exist independently of ISBA in good time. But it's industry owned. So advertisers are a huge stakeholder in it, which is unusual in the measurement area. But also there's platform ownership as well, and as well as the trade association ownership. And we are in the process of putting the model, the schematic that Matt was discussing, into it's past its working pilot process and is going into full-scale build at the moment. I hate to overpromise here. I'm sure Steve's going to say something. I think 24 are we looking at this? So to give you some idea of the scale of this project and its importance in the market. It's a multi-million pound investment that the industry is making that currently ISBA is coordinating.
Interesting. You've talked about, you mentioned, Matt, standards, like framework, principles, standards. I want to understand from all of you how you go about setting standards and whether you communicate with each other. Like, do you get pushback from other factions of the industry when you're setting standards? For example, when I was working an agency side, I remember getting very annoyed with ISBA because you would release advertiser standards, the agencies would go, that's absolute rubbish, like that's not how we operate, like you've made our lives really difficult. Does that happen, Richard?
That's a really valid point. I think to what Claire and Matt were saying, and I think Origin and things are really exciting, and I understand the value, and I already see the value for many of our members with things like PAMCO. But I think one of the things that you recognise as your responsibility as a trade body is that your members are effectively funding you to be effective on their behalf. And so you have to be aware of what's going on. And if you haven't been invited to that conversation, then as a stakeholder representing the online publishing community, we'll knock on that door until we're invited. And actually, it's not a question of having to bang on the door, because you are welcome, because one of the complexities that we all continue to learn and understand, one of the realities that we continue to learn and understand about the complexities is that sometimes good thinking can be driven by one community and it's not understood what the unintended consequences might be to other communities. And you know, to the question you initially asked, Matt, I think that one of the interesting things about my journey and the journey for publishers is that when I first got involved with AOP, all the conversation was around advertising. Now, advertisers, rightly, they would suggest perhaps, maybe I would say wrongly, but whatever, you know, programmatic as an era has provided an opportunity to target behaviours and at a reasonably cost-effective way. And if you're going to do that, then it's about scale. So you'd hear advertisers talking to publishers about, well, actually, we'd like to put more money into your environment, but can you come together? And then on goes a light bulb and something like the Ozone Project's board. But what we've also seen is publishers recognise that they're really comfortable with the experience they provide and the audiences they know, their audiences. And that creates opportunities to diversify. I mean, advertising is still a very significant source of revenue for all publishers. But perhaps the advent of the social media platforms was the push that some needed to explore ways of innovating around new revenue streams and diversifying through different models. And I think that's again something that brings us all together, because in order to do that, in order to develop pay models or e-commerce models or whatever it may be, we live in an era where that's only possible to innovate if it's enabled by technologies. And so it's important to talk to all constituents continuously, because that also allows the vendor community to see a trend develop and to help inform, you know, that progression through the technology that they already possess that can be adapted for those purposes. So, you know, if you don't talk, nothing happens.
So I think it's important to, your question around standards is really important. You know, all industries have standards or sets of best practice or codes of conduct. Partly and mostly to establish transparency and efficiencies in the industry, because if you're operating to known parameters, you can design more efficient systems and workflow processes and so on and so forth. So there are very few industries that don't have trade bodies, and that is, you know, part of their role is to do that. And there's a really live example of something that we've just done, which is creating the very first, because one didn't exist before, was the influencer code of conduct, which interestingly has had a lot of airplay in various parliamentary committees lately.
Doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
You know, as an example of what is good. And the reason why we created it was because there was nothing to establish the boundaries of how influencers and their talent agencies and advertisers would communicate. There was no sort of sense of a solid foundation, and that was really the birth of it. And we've just produced a second iteration of it now, addressing diversity and inclusion issues as well. And we will keep iterating it, but not the advertisers saying, you know, we did not do it on our own. We, you know, consulted broadly and widely with the agencies and with the influencers themselves in order to do it, which is, I mean, you do this all the time, Matt. It's an essential part of the work, is to look outside of our industry constantly to our partners.
We're running out of time, but I want to talk about regulation because probably one of the single biggest things that's impacted us, certainly across Europe over the past few years, has been regulation. How does regulation affect you as industry associations and your members? And what guidance are you able to provide your members to help them tackle this and navigate what is a really, really kind of challenging thing to understand? Matt, WFA?
Yeah, well, quite a lot of work we do is working with the European institutions on incoming regulation. There's lots of work done on GDPR and e-privacy and stuff like that. And I think there's been lots that we've done to help our members understand the implications of that regulation and help them prepare for it as well. So there's a big body of work there. So yeah, I mean that's the main cut and thrust of what we're going to do there is lobby on occasion on incoming regulation, so it better reflects the needs of our members, and then help our members prepare for it.
Interesting. Richard, Chloe, regulations obviously had a huge impact on publishers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Regulation is a part of our world. I mean, obviously, how do we respond depends on what that regulation is. But I think the proactive behaviour of us as a trade association has been about ensuring that we have a pathway into those conversations with the regulators, and that we've worked hard to develop relationships with all aspects of government, DCMS, CMA and others. And part of our responsibility is to help educate them, because they are there to be educated. They're really happy to be educated. And I think that we are able to self-regulate. Are we effective in all aspects of self-regulation, of being able to enforce it? Probably not. Does there therefore need consideration where in some instances a regulatory backstop exists? But again, those things only work, and a regulatory backstop is only effective if they understand the issues and the problems. And that's a trade body's responsibility, is to hear from the publishers, understand what those challenges are, and in some cases those consequences or unintended consequences, and make sure that we do our very best to represent so that those interests can be reflected in future policy and behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, the case in point at the moment, we just submitted our consultation response for the online advertising programme with the DCMS, which is, for anyone who's not familiar with that, that's the government department in the UK who is looking currently at what regulatory requirements there may be outstanding in the online advertising industry. As Richard says, media in this country is regulated, but on a self-regulatory basis. Then there's Ofcom that looks to oversee a lot of those different channels. The unregulated part of the industry thus far, which is why we had the online advertising program, has been digital advertising, and is not regulated or held to account in the same way. So we will be looking at changes, but very much after us. We consulted with our members, DCMS consulted with us, with our members. We held, during the process of the consultation, at least 3 different roundtables with our members and the DCMS itself. So they would, the government comes to us because they expect us to be the conduit to our members, and the same with the IAB. They went through exactly the same process, the AOP, etc. And in my entire career, I have never witnessed as much change taking place simultaneously in an industry as this one, which makes it incredibly exciting. But at great times, or times of great change, such as we're going through, we will expect a lot of regulation, especially in such an important area as media. We're going to expect a lot of regulatory interest. And that's what we're living with. It's consultation after consultation after consultation at the moment. A lot of work.
I think I've broken the microphone, so apologies for that. But keep on screwing it and you stop filling with things. We are unfortunately out of time. I have so much more I want to ask you, but I can't ask you today. So maybe we can have this conversation again some other time. But thank you so much for joining me on stage. It's been great to chat to you. Thank you, Matt, Claire, and Richard. Give them a round of applause.